Hey everyone, welcome to session 58 of the Behavioral Observations podcast, and boy do I have a fun conversation to share with you today. This is one of those kind of pinch me moments because I had a chance to talk to someone who is extraordinarily influential in our field, none other than Dr. Stephen Hayes. We talk about a whole host of things. We talk about evolution science and its role and as it relates to behavior analysis, where the field's going, how he would change training if he could wave a magic wand. We talk about the upcoming ACT boot camp in Baltimore that's taking place from September 27th to 30th, and the people who are putting that on Praxis. They are sponsoring this show, this podcast episode. And so if you do decide to participate in that and you want to save a few bucks, you can use the offer code BOP at checkout. But anyway, we talk about that. We talk about his new book that's coming out. Again, he gives some great advice for newly minted BCBAs. So I really recommend staying through the entire episode. He really weaves in a lot of really fun stories and talks about some provocative topics. So yes, this is not without controversy. I'm sure it will generate quite a bit of feedback. So he is game for coming back for a Q&A round as well. So we have that to look forward to also. So before we get to that, I want to let you know that this podcast is sponsored by Clinical Behavior Analysis, Constellations Behavioral Services, and HRI of Colorado, and we'll hear from those folks a little bit later throughout the episode. So, without any further delay, let's get to this really fun conversation with Steve Hayes.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now, here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Steve Hayes, welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm turning 70 today. And so it's a big day for me, and not the least of which I get to talk to you and through you to people who I hope are interested in the work and who I know are part of a tradition that I revere.
Awesome. Well, thank you. First of all, happy birthday, and thank you for spending a portion of it with me and, by extension, the audience. This has been something I've been wanting to do for a while. We've had audience requests to have you on the program. I can't even tell you how many, countless requests. So, and longtime listeners to the program will know that ACT is a very, very popular topic. Having you on the show is a treat here. So before I fall all over myself with all that stuff, I probably should just get right into the meat and potatoes of what we want to talk about today. So, what was the landscape of psychology or behavior analysis like when you were an undergraduate and coming up into graduate school? Obviously, the field has evolved considerably, over the last several decades. So I like to start with getting some history, to share with, particularly with some of our younger audience members.
Yeah. Well, I'm old enough to have seen a lot of this stuff up close and personal. I spent many hours with Skinner, with Fred, and that was what he called him. But if I back up even to kind of how I landed there, at the time I'm coming into psychology, I decided to be a psychologist in high school because I cared about both science and literature and art and human complexity, and I couldn't see any other field that would give me that. The people who really were interesting to me were people like Maslow and stuff, peak experiences, all that, and they're really making a difference, of how you run your life, not so much just mental health problems. And I read Walden too. And I read Walden too as a freshman in college. And I said, wow, this is so cool for a person who wants to be in a field because they want to combine an interest in, art and literature and human complexity and all that with science. Here's a thing that has all of that. What I bought into was the From Rats to Walden 2 agenda that Skinner himself had, which is high precision, high scope principles, scalable to anywhere that you would want psychological and behavioral knowledge to go. But at the time, of course, that was pretty radical idea. And it really is still a very radical idea, but there was such enthusiasm and stuff in there. So I've been to all the ABAIs and stuff, even the MABAs, as I went through graduate school. Initially, I'm kind of worried. I don't want to be too behavioral. I went to West Virginia University. I don't know, are you too behavioral? Well, within about a year, that was behind me. And I was there just as West Virginia became a very strong behavioral center. So I worked with people who are still teaching, Andy Littell and people like that. John Cohn was my mentor, who was a behavior analyst, and started the journal Behavioral Assessment. And then went to North Carolina, worked with Rosemary Nelson, who was president of ABCT, and then have spent 35 years, whatever, at the University of Nevada, building a behavior analysis program and a clinical program. But to say, what was it like? This is the era with Clockwork Orange, with behavior modification, with sentences in the New York Times like, the behavior modifiers and psychosurgeons who brainwash it was like that. Major reporters, they would write sentences where they would put together, psychosurgery and behavior modification. And basically the idea is the fascists have arrived and who's going to control the controllers. And Skinner, God bless him, made a mistake in titling Beyond Freedom and Dignity the way he did. The book itself it's not about instead of freedom and dignity. It's about not letting go of those concepts get in the way so that we can empower people to have what they really want, which is pretty darn close to freedom and dignity, but it's not inside the purely mentalistic view of that. He was the best known scientist in the world and my hero, my intellectual hero, but boy, did we live through some rough times where just being a behaviorist at all, was almost to the point where people might want to throw things at you. But within the group, we were so excited, and ABBAs were so exciting. And over time, that the field narrowed, and that's part of where we are now, 30 plus odd years later, of looking to see, did Skinner know everything? Did he? You probably think not. Have things moved on? Do we know things now? You'd probably say, I hope so. And how can we bring that into the field? But what I still retain is the From Rats to Walden 2 agenda of taking everything we know about behavioral science and being able to apply it to human complexity properly nested within a functional contextual view of life itself, which basically is evolution science. And that was Skinner's dream, and I'm still trying to make it happen.
All right, so we'll come back to that term evolution science later, because I know you have a new edited book coming out on that. So we'll get there in a little bit. But
not just coming out.
Oh, it is out. Oh, all right. So
just got it 2 days ago.
Excellent. So Steve is holding up a copy of the newly printed. Keep it there for a sec. I'll take a screenshot of this. All right. Yeah. I'll put that on Instagram. So if you guys go to @behavioral observations, you'll see that there by the time this is published. So,
sure.
Anywho, before we get to like a wider discussion of evolution science, ACT, and things that, as I've mentioned, ACT has been a topic on the show numerous times, and every once in a while I'll get an email from a listener who is, kind of either an ACT or an RFT skeptic, right?
Sure.
And I know when the original RFT book came out, there was quite a bit of discussion in I think it was in JAB, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
And a number of articles, kind of going back and forth and things like that. Yeah. You're probably, so this is a debate that's probably, 2 decades old easily.
Yeah, it is.
And you might be tired of addressing it, but
not at all.
Okay, well, good. Then I won't apologize for the question. So what would you say? And we don't have time to kind of delve into the specifics of the actual debate, if you will. But, for those listeners out there who might be skeptical of some of the things that you've advanced through, relational frame theory and ACT and whatnot, what would you say to someone who is skeptical of those things?
Well, first, I'd say skepticism is wonderful scientifically. Hang on to it. And there's a difference between skepticism and cynicism. And in order to keep yourself from being one to the other, you have to really focus on the data, have pretty clear ideas about what you expect of data, and be guided by the data. If what you're guided by is something more like a presumption that a particular model is true regardless, or it can't be this way or it can't be that way, and you're really not fully willing to subject that to criticism, and there's a little piece of the behavioral work, behavior analytic work, which feeds that, which is frankly the overemphasis on interpretation, which I think came from the inadequacy of some of the existing accounts. But if you bring that kind of skepticism and link it up to data, then that's just good science. And so I was not at all really frustrated with how quickly RFT, for example, less so ACT is more of a challenge, but even there, came into behavior analysis until about 10 or 15 years in, when the data got substantial enough. And I was saying things like this: look, they couldn't have a more simple and behaviorally friendly theory or model than to say that something's an operant. Could you get any more simple than that? Can you get any more behavioral than that? Now, you could be wrong. I'm not saying just because you say the O word that it's right, but don't be telling me things like it can't be an operant and then saying, not telling why. Because that would be like saying that without that you don't have clear criteria for what an operant is. Well, you don't protect operant psychology by saying, I can't recognize an operant when I see one. Therefore, I don't have to change my views. Well, that's like burning down the house to protect it. What worth is operant psychology if you can't recognize an operant? So I'm not saying just because you make the claim. No, where's the evidence? And so early we would say things like, well, it develops, it's under contextual control, it's responsive to consequential control, just things like that. And we could show that it was, and that wasn't enough. People would say, well, no, you have to take kids and you have to show that you can shape it, and you have to show that, okay, so we did that. And then still it's like, no, it can't be like that. Why can't it be like that? It's just impossible. Then you start sniffing around and you start thinking it's impossible because Fred didn't say it. Well, now we've crossed a Rubicon. Now we have a living memorial to a dead person. He's my hero, but no living memorials. Literally, that hero of mine would roll in his grave, I believe, if he heard people saying, if Fred didn't say it, it's not right. The most creative and innovative person scientifically in the 20th century. And because he was willing to say really bold things to do measures. So don't get me in a full rant on that. But so I would say to them is here's this very, very, very simple theory. Let's say RFT. Are there relational operants? Yes or no? And we have defined what we mean by relational operant. Okay. Second question. Are relational operants key? Not the only thing, but are they a key thing in the development of human language and higher cognition? And I'll say the C word on purpose. There's nothing mentalistic about words. You can say soul, spirit, anything you want. Meaning is use. If you really believe that, you can't find what's mentalistic just by looking in the dictionary. You have to look at how it's used and where it fits in the overall structure of things. So I'm ready to defend a naturalistic, non-mentalistic account. Well, and then at some point you say it's not just a key thing. You could sort of say something like this. Human language is not associative. It's not based on direct contingencies. It's relational, and the relational operants lead to indirect contingencies. So we started trying to understand rule-governed behavior, and it gives you a way of doing that. Now, one other thing I want to say, though, hold on to your skepticism, look for data. But the final thing is this. Human language and cognition, I believe, is an evolutionarily recent adaptation. I believe that what we're doing right now has been going on for somewhere between 400 and maybe 3 million years, depending on what the hominins are doing. We pretty much now know, I think it's an empirically established fact, that non-human animals don't do what we're doing right now, either at all or with any ease or sophistication. And, we're 3 decades in. We can't say, well, maybe, and not take it seriously for another 30 years. By then, this field that we've created is put itself so much in a cul-de-sac that nobody's listening to it anymore. We've already narrowed it down in populations and all the rest by hanging on to direct act and contingencies, I think, too strongly. And so, but the thing I do want to say to people is this evolutionary recent adaptation harnesses or redirects evolutionarily ancient processes such as operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is probably 500 million years old. Why? Because every species that evolved since the Cambrian does it, and none of them before do it. And in fact, why the Cambrian explosion happened is because of operant conditioning. Because then you have niche selection and niche construction. And as the recent book walked through, oh golly, I'm a matter of consequences is a science of consequences. The flamingo's beak didn't happen so that first, and then you could filter out crustaceans in mud. You were digging in mud for the tasty crustaceans first, for a long time, and then the beak adaptations, the phenotypic changes occurred. In other words, operant conditioning is the driver of evolution. And so when you have something like emerge, like relational operants that operate back on those ancient processes, now we have to rethink everything. So message to my behavior analytic colleagues. Here's the good news. There are relational operants. You can train them. Kids' lives open up. Parents start working with you differently. ACT gives you some technology. The RFT, we got wonderful, exciting things to do. And oh, by the way, it puts us at the center of psychology, not because we're doing monkey see, monkey do, but because we're doing behavior analysis that is that relevant. Bad side, we got to rethink everything. Good side, we got to rethink everything. So it's cool. It's wonderful. It's science. Woohoo! And some folks don't necessarily want to go down that journey. I get it. It's okay. But don't be throwing, this isn't behavioral things at me unless you're willing to have an argument. So not an argument like a bad argument.
No,
but
I get it.
Conversation.
Sure.
So anytime, anywhere, I'm happy to have that conversation. And meanwhile, the young people are voting with their feet. So the old folks who said, Katie, bar the door, we're just not going to do it. They're not here to stop it. And so good luck if you want to keep RFT out of behavior analysis.
I see. And yeah, we can go down so many roads here. Let's talk about behavior analysis as being incorporated into a wider evolution science. I've read some papers that you've
sure
made that argument for. I guess one of the things I want to start with is just unpacking what you mean by evolution. Let's just define evolution science first, and then talk about how behavior analysis, at least from your point of view, fits underneath that or into that, or however you choose to describe it.
Great, and it's not just my point of view; it's B.F. Skinner's point of view. But evolution science, I like thinking of first in the way that Darwin laid it out, and then in the more modern version where that lands. I think it's a multidimensional, multi-level exploration of variation, selection, and retention in context at all levels of life. Genetic, epigenetic, behavioral and social, symbolic, at all levels, cultural. Skinner's was so right. He was so right. I mean, not perfect, but my goodness, the field has moved on. And the evolutionists were wrong about evolution itself. What Skinner was talking about of, for example, the good of the group and that kind of thing. And, you can look at the Behavioral and Brain Sciences special issue of his canonical papers while he's still alive, and critics are laughing at him that he's just so ignorant, he doesn't understand evolution. That's where evolution went. It turns out multi-level selection, which was in the ash heap of evolutionary thinking, namely that selection operates at all levels. It operates at the level of the individual and at the sub-level within the individual. It operates at the level of the small group. It operates at the level of the larger group. So Skinner had the idea that variation and selection applied through cultural contingencies, through genetic processes, and through contingencies of reinforcement. Now, we have to add a few things on that. We have to add the symbolic side, and we really need to think through its implications. But so evolution science is simply variation, selection, and retention in context of the right dimension and level. That's it. And I think what you're doing when you're working with people is you're doing applied evolution science. And I don't think that statement will be at all controversial 20 years from now, maybe even 10 years from now. And if we play our cards right, we belong inside there, because variation selection within the lifetime of an individual behaviorally up and down regulates through epigenetic mechanisms, gene expression, and through that phenotypes and speciation itself. It's altering niche selection, niche construction, and through social learning processes and cultural processes, the kind of things Fred talked about or the IO people are working on. Behavior scales into things that go beyond the lifetime of the individual through those means as well. And integrating all of them in one big tent takes a lot. No one person can do it. Takes a community. Community of who? Of biologists, of anthropologists, of sociologists, and if you really get bold, people studying religion and organizations and art and literature and genetics and brain circuits and epigenetics and behavior within the lifetime of the individual. Why? Because it's actually the driver of all those things. We're not the one-headed arrow pointing at psychology. The genes made me do it, or the brain made me do it, or the culture made me do it. No, it's a double-headed arrow, and it turns out that the variation selection within the lifetime of the individual alters all those processes. Cells are systems for turning environment and behavior into biology. And so we're not just the queen of the sciences in the sense that you can do a behavioral account of scientists. I think we're the queen of the evolution sciences in the sense that evolution science itself is not yet fully ready for prime time because we're missing at the table. And I think they now know that. They don't fully know it. They don't fully realize it. But this book begins the conversation. And we'll see where it goes. It's going to be exciting, and a lot of things are going to change.
Clinical Behavior Analysis, or CBA for short, is Kentucky's expert provider of applied behavior analysis, counseling, and direct support services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, acquired brain injury, and autism. And they're about to open the Center for Behavior Analysis, a 13,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility in Louisville, Kentucky. And they're looking for a clinical director to lead a highly motivated team of BCBAs and technicians. If you're not familiar with Louisville, it's been rated by U.S. News & World Report as one of the nation's best places to live. With a low cost of living, your industry-leading salary and signing bonus will go a lot further. And with an abundance of cultural and recreational activities, you will not lack for fun things to do. So to learn more, go to cbacares.com/careers and set up your confidential interview today. I have a friend of mine, one of my good friends from graduate school, Steve Lawyer. He's been on the podcast before, and he says, from his point of view, he considers himself a scientist first, a psychologist second, and a behavior analyst third, I guess, kind of nested in one another. Are you saying, I guess, based on what you just talked about, is that behavior analysts will be practicing, I guess, evolution science in general as the larger, I guess, umbrella, and within that, funneled down into the practice of behavior analysis of one of the ways in which you can do evolution science, essentially? Is that what you're...
Not just one of the ways, because it depends on the dimensions that are important, and it depends on the level at which it's important. But in general, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is that, and it was Skinner's last sentence the night before he died, and He wrote variation and selection is going to be important to practical behavior change, something like this. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not sure it'll be called psychology. And then that's exactly right. And will it be called behavior analysis? I don't know what it'll be called, but the behavioral level, the level of the individual interacting in and with the context, considered historically and situationally. There's a hole in the fabric of science. This is always Skinner's argument. That's left if that's not there. And so when you reduce behavior to brains or genes, or when you expand it to nothing more than social cultural processes, you miss a level of analysis that must be addressed, or the fabric of science that we're trying to weave. So a unified fabric of science was always the game inside behavior analysis. Now, we've kind of lost that a little bit because we've narrowed our practice. And behavior analysis is now almost synonymous with the practice because it's been so spectacularly successful in a few areas where direct acting tendencies are easily applied. Now, does that mean that the individual BCBA, for example, needs to know all about genetics and epigenetics? And I'd say no. It's enough if there's some water carriers. And in all of these areas, it's the same way that the BCBAs don't know all the things that are in JAB either. As long as you have a bridge and you have enough water carriers and you read and you're curious, and then take what's useful. And most of the things that we do in terms of behavior change, we really need language and cognition in there. We probably need right now some moderation, some consideration of what genetic and epigenetic processes are there. And we certainly do in the social and cultural. I mean, that's required. It's when it's in the task list and stuff. You got to attend to some of those variables. As that plays out, I think you're going to see other things. Like, I don't think we're very far away from times we're taking oral swabs to see what's happening with your epigenome is another behavioral measure. Yes. Why not? Not that expensive. Tells you really important things. Our conversation right now might be in your body, every freaking cell in your body, a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. We already know that, just 8 hours of meditation. This is Herb Benson's data out of Boston. He's the guy who demystified TM and the Maharishi. It's the Maharishi without woo-woo. Herb Benson's already showed that for 8 freaking sessions of his demystified TM, and 7% of your genes reliably up or down regulate through epigenetic changes.
So TM meaning transcendental meditation.
Yeah. Excuse me, I'm an old guy, and
that's
Maharishi,
okay.
People say who? Google it. Beatles, Maharishi, right. Transcendental meditation. But you don't have to have some special mantra by the woo-woo. Just say the word one. That's Herb's thing. Just say one over and over again, etc. So I'll let him speak for the technology. But we have behavior analysts, and Nirve Singh is a behavior analyst, focusing on the soles of your feet. I mean, there's no reason at all that behavior analysts shouldn't be part of the mindfulness work when we've actually been part of it, and not just the current stuff. We've had people, or some of our heroes and stuff, Bob Waller or Don Baer, or people. Come on, I mean, do people not know that these heroes were part of these other things? Do people not know that Charlie Furster was an analysand? Who went to 5 days a week of psychoanalysis? I mean, I always wonder, do people not know?
I think you're right. Yeah, there's probably some truth to that.
It really distresses me. When I gave a talk at ABAI, I put up some pictures. Unfortunately, I realized my time wouldn't allow me to unpack them fully. But, I had a picture in there of Charlie Furster. I had a picture of Ralph Hefferline. I had a picture, I think, of Og Lindsley and some of these other heroes. Ralph Hefferline freaking invented, with pearls, Gestalt therapy. Ralph Hefferline is a card-carrying behavior analyst at Columbia, a colleague of Fred Keller's, doing animal work. And now if I said Gestalt therapy, say, it's mentalistic. Don't you know your own history? I mean, and you read the freaking thing. Instantly, I resonated to Gestalt therapy after I was sort of entering into the behavior analytic domain as an undergraduate. And of course I did, because all those exercises were very behavioral. And that's what he had a class at Columbia, excuse me for this little dialogue, but called the Psychology of Personal Experience. And it was essentially a behavioral account of private events, and with exercises that would allow you to actually see yourself. I'm back in the day when radical behaviorism meant you can look within, but you recognize that you have limits because the public community shapes you to see what you see. But we'd be doing little, counts of thoughts, counts of feelings, well, that went places that are alive today in wings of psychology that we push away from us because it's not behavioral and we invented it. So enough already with all that. But excuse me for the tangential. But
I love the tangents. Tangents are the best. It reminds me of the behavioral relaxation training. And I have the book right over my shoulder here. I'm blanking on the who was the author? Who's the guy who did that in Illinois? Anyway.
Sure.
It
Roger
was
Poppin.
Yes, that's exactly
and,
it.
And that came out of a very sensible, Jacobson is not just some big mentalistic guy, original Jacobsonian stuff. And Roger is about behavior analytics as you can get. People they don't know their history.
Yeah.
And relaxation training was popularized in part because of his work and other functional thinkers, Tom Borkovics of the world and people like that, who, they're a little bit off, but they're not way off. Back in the day, the behavior therapists, the behavior analysts, people like Bandura, principles of behavior modification. If you wanted to pick somebody who's not behavioral, you might pick Bandura. Come on. So I don't mean that we should just go back to our roots, but we should be careful about that. Now, coming back to the point I was trying to make is you don't have to know everything, but let's, hold our own work a little bit lightly, just enough that we can dig down to what would it be like to look at it, the whole organism interacting with the context considered historically in situation, with the full range of current methodologies and practices, and not just be thumping books, whether it's what you think you see in Skinner, or I see something different, or whether it's the white book. Either way, it's still book thumping, and I would rather be in the business of functional analysis and seeing what we can do to be of use to people.
I love it. I love my job. My name's Alyssa, and I work for Constellations Behavioral Services. I love my job because I feel like I'm making a difference in children's lives. I think the most exciting piece of the job is really knowing that you're going to be able to help people who are really desperately seeking out support. When I'm interviewing someone, I get really excited when people say, I know I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm really excited to make change in kids' lives. I want to research, I want to learn, I want support, I want feedback, I want to see where this field is going. Awesome. So I would say someone coming into Constellations needs to be passionate, excited, willing to learn, willing to grow, and willing to come along for the ride.
For more information about job opportunities in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, visit constellationsbehavioral.com/careers. Where do you think, mainstream psychology is going to go? You've offered a couple of predictions here thus far, but I'm a psych major, or I was a psych major, and as an undergraduate and as a grad student, I was fortunate enough to, as many, and I'm in my mid 40s now. So when I was in graduate school in the 90s, and undergraduate at that point in time, it's like you'd find like a behavior analyst or two in a department, unless you were at like Florida or Kansas or what have you.
Sure.
I guess where I'm going with this is that, I'm just curious, do you think mainstream psychology, and what I mean by that is that everything other than behavior analysis will get subsumed under this evolution science, or where do you see that going? The cognitive psychologist, the personality psychologist, et cetera.
It's a gradual transformation, but here's the deal. Here's the enormous advantage that we have, is that we have a set of philosophical assumptions that allow prediction and influence, or prediction and control, the way Fred said, to be our truth criteria. That means the basic people and the applied people are playing the same game. And that's not true in vast amounts of psychology for all kinds of reasons having to do with the history of the fields and the particular philosophical assumptions they brought to it. And, functional contextualism, a little tweak of radical behaviorism, but important tweak, or radical behaviorism, if you want to say it that way. But boy, if you really want to be not listened to, go into a big room with psychologists, I'm a radical behaviorist. It's like going into a church group and saying, I like child pornography. I mean, you're just not going to be listened to after that, gang. I'm sorry. But it's not just a matter of terminology. There's actually some mistakes, little ones, in the radical behavioral thing. But when you dial it in, we have this enormous advantage. So like you corner a cognitive psychologist and say, quick, tell me the really important things that have changed human lives that are directly, experimentally, point to point coming out of your work. And after you wipe the drool off their chin, you're going to just have long periods of silence because, reading programs, really, have you shown it at the process level? It's, maybe a few things, so I'm reading these papers. I'm not going to mention names here, but occasionally I get sent things to review. I almost always say, no, I'm tired of reviewing, but I get them from really major figures. And sometimes I'll say yes, because they figured he's a behaviorist, let him look at it. And they're moving in the behavioral direction. I mean, everybody from Chomsky on down or what. But number two, they all realize they've got to be somehow applied. You have to be able to it has to be translatable. It has to be, even the feds want it. You go to NSF, they want you to, how is this going to change it? So translational research and all of that has changed the game. And they can't play it. I can't play it. Why? Because their concepts don't touch context. That's the problem of mentalistic concepts. It isn't the word. It's that when you're referring to facets of behavior without history and circumstance being in the concept, then you don't know where to go to change the concept. When that means you don't know directly how to produce application, and that means you can make mistakes. So you take something like in CBT, rational cognitions, where's the context? Rational cognition, where's the context? Your brain made, no, that happened after the rational cognitions, I get. But you're saying the brain made you think, no, where's the context? Parents, doing what? And so then when they get into therapy, it's like, I'm going to tell you not to think that. Watch it, don't think that, don't think that. Well, there's nothing in the theory says telling people not to think stuff is helpful. And guess what? Detecting, challenging, disputing, and changing private events called thoughts often increases the stimulus control they exert over behavior. It doesn't decrease it. So it doesn't matter that you're calling it irrational. You may be doing something that actually is interfering. And then you do the meta-analysis, and sure enough, that component isn't what produces the outcomes. That process is often not what actually changes, that predicts the outcomes. It doesn't mediate, it doesn't moderate very well. And when it does, it fits our ideas, like cognitive flexibility. Fine. Variation and selection. Detect, challenge, dispute, and change? No. Why did you do that? Because you had a bad theory. Because it was just obvious. If it had to be changed, you have to change it by telling people to do something different. So here we come into an era where people want things from us. They're beginning to say, those $1 billion we spent, what have you done for us lately? And there's a whole lot of big name science wings that aren't ready to step forward. We are, but we narrowed down so much that only in a few areas. And there's no reason for that. The only thing that held us back, in my opinion, was that we needed a really good theory of language and cognition. And Fred's theory took us to a mental age of about 3, and that's not good enough. It's just not good enough. And we can go beyond that. We respect that, but Sidman gave us the beginning. Relational frame theory builds on it. Once you realize that what Sidman was talking about is an operant, man, you can do so many things with it. And so what I see ahead is our analytic assumptions now combined with this, this powerful engine of change called relational operants will, as behavior analysts get into it, be able to very quickly advance our field so much that we're being hired not because we're behavior analysts and we want to produce BCBAs, but because we have the best dang work going on in memory and the best work we know on organizational change or reducing stigma or helping, people have relationships that work or helping them deal with anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and on it goes. In other words, without us changing our tradition, but simply allowing our tradition to be liberated, we can go to the center because people pull us there because of what we can do. And I don't think that's fantasy land. I think we see it right in front of us. I know this is a long talk. One of the things that happens when you're 70, you just hold forth. I'll be eventually in a rocking chair. They'll have to, shut up, Grandpa. But I think you see it in what's happened with ACT. I have some behavioral critics from people who I really love and respect. Some second-generation behavior analysts who sometimes write me really tough messages like, "You've ruined behavior analysis," things like that.
Really?
Yes. I won't name names. But the only person, frankly, in the whole second generation who actually publicly said, "This is cool," that I can remember is Todd Risley. But then he died 6 months later, and I wasn't able to really reap much benefit of that. But at the University of Kansas, he shocked the whole room. It was stood up and said, "This is the kind of thing we should be doing." And it took a few years to get a little more mainstream. But what I've done in response is not so much argue it out point by point, but I used to be able to send them the Amazon list. Now there's so many ACT books and RFT books, they self-reference. But in the early days, you could see, and occasionally you still do, the people who are buying behavioral texts are people who are buying ACT and RFT texts. And you start buying it, you start coming into ACT because you're a humanist, you're a Gestalt person, you're an analytic person. The next thing you know, you think, I kind of need to understand contingencies, and you're buying the ABCs of behavior. This is cool. And so people don't recognize it, but I think the contextual behavioral science wing has done more to get behavioral ideas in more places than almost any of it, because we've learned how to make friends, how to talk in multiple ways, how to reach into phenomena that are complex that people want solutions for, and how not to shame people because they don't know how to talk behavioralese. You do all those things, the world wants us, and this whole problem of right now we can almost not replicate other than inside behavior analysis programs because we can't get them hired. That's not true of the RFT people. Go look in Europe. Where are the graduates of Dermot's lab, Dermot Unibaum's lab going? Mainstream departments of psychology. So where are the ACT people going? Where are the people coming out of my lab at 50 PhDs? You go look. Mostly mid-majors, I admit, but mainstream doctoral programs in clinical. So, and they're doing RFT work. So, among other things, we're going to need a different way to get through this little bottleneck because we've got ourselves in such a problem now. Even ABAI is trying to figure, can we help fund professorships somewhere? Because they realize, holy beans, none of the basic labs can put their students into places that then will produce more PhDs. Well, then they're like neutered bees. I mean, it doesn't help us produce master's people if they're not going to be able to be hired to be faculty in mainstream and do the research and so forth. So I'm sorry for the long answer, but there we go. The future is going to be naturalistic and behavioral. It's going to be pragmatic, and it's going to include behavior analysis, whatever it's called. It might be called contextual behavioral science, and it's not very far away. And why evolution science? Because you have to deal with biology. So much of biology is mechanistic, and the only functional contextualists there, you do an end run around the decade of the brain and all the rest. Yes, we need to look at the brain. Yes, we need to look at genetics. We'll do an end run around that barrier that they built to behavior analysis, even nominating it as a standard social science model and sneering at us as being irrelevant. No, we're not irrelevant. We're connected to the best theory in all of biology and life sciences, which is evolution.
You mentioned ACT a few minutes ago, and I want to talk a little bit about ACT as a popular thing it's becoming increasingly popular amongst, what I would call kind of mainstream BCBAs,
Sure.
master's level practitioners, and and I know that at the end of September that there's the Big ACT boot camp, and you guys have already done a couple of them already, and things like that. So I guess my first question is that there's a lot of concern about scope of practice. I hear scope of practice, scope of practice. Every time ACT comes up, stay within your scope, stay within your scope. What does that mean to you as someone, particularly someone from the standpoint who is conducting these multi-day ACT boot camps and things like that? And what is I guess the transformation that you see from the beginning to the end of these kind of boot camps as it relates to the participants? And I should say, just disclaim something before you answer, is that Praxis is sponsoring this episode, and so I am promoting the ACT boot camp. So I just want to be
That's a good COI.
Well, I just want to disclose that and be transparent about it. But I did want to talk about it regardless.
I don't own either one, but I've helped both, and so I have a little piece of that. But I did own something, Context Press, years ago. Why? Because we needed to get these ideas out there. And if you look at the history of this, Context Press was important. And then it was bought by New Harbinger, and then it continues to be important, I think. And so we'll see how far. And I helped them with titles and all that kind of stuff. So there is a COI there, but it came from trying to find a place to amplify our voices. If it had meant that Linda and I were stuffing books into bags, that's what it meant back in the day. Mm-hmm. Or standing behind a booth. I have pictures of myself, doing that. Here's what happens. This is a little bit like back in the day. I'm old enough to remember I had a T-shirt that had a red fist on it. It said radical behaviorism. And then on the back it said better living through behaviorism. I remember the day when, if you want to be a behaviorist, that moment when you're first working with a laboratory animal, or when you're first doing shaping, let's say, with a child with developmental disabilities, and you see how contingencies control behavior, and you go like, wow, that's cool.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and in the early days, and I wonder if it's still true, people had that experience with their own behavior. They would apply behavioral principles to their own behavior. They would count, they'd reinforce, they'd enter into public commitments, they'd have other people control the consequences, and it'd be like, wow, I'm doing so much better at this thing, right? Okay, so what happens in ACT training almost always is we start with personal experience, not because that's a substitute for data. You have to be careful about it. But because since it's built on general principles, if it doesn't apply to you, then why would you think it would apply to other people? And so what you're starting to see is that people see right away the behavior changes it makes. They're doing a better job of getting in there and doing really hard things. BCBAs are required to do really hard things. They see things that are emotionally difficult. They have conversations that are emotionally difficult. It's personally difficult for them. And if you don't give behavior analysts a way of dealing with private events inside their own life, when their clients bring them up, which they do almost every single session and in spades in some sessions, they become creatures of the culture and they say mentalistic things. Or they send people out to social workers and you're like, run away. I can't talk about emotion. That's mentalistic. I can't talk about thoughts. No, please, that can't be the answer. That's not Skinnerian. I don't know what behavioral analysis that is. Maybe Watson even did it, but I doubt that. He invented talk aloud as a way of understanding problem solving, and which the cognitivists now have used. That was Watson. So even Watson wasn't the cartoon Watson, never mind Skinner. But we start there, but then we also then focus the technology and the methods and the principles on existing populations and problems that you're working with. And as long as you're doing that, and we actually suggest that people use the phrase acceptance and commitment training instead of therapy.
Yeah, the therapy word weirds people out for sure.
It weirds people out, and they hear psychotherapy. And there are some places like SIU that always had therapy linked to behavior analysis, but they're too few. And so it's just not safe. Think of it as training, and you'll be safer. Apply it to the populations you work with now. Work with others and make sure you're not on a slippery slope. But you take something like parent training. Can behavior analysts do parent training? Do you think?
I hope so.
I hope so. I hope so. Well, when you look at the data, that we're having values conversations with people or helping them with difficult emotions by, noticing the emotions, applying. You can do some of this with online resources, with books. Behavior analysts can't give books to people. They can't refer them to online. I mean, Ramona Humanfar has developed entire kind of online protocols for these ACT elements that she's using with medical students as a behavior analyst. Why not? And then we've done the research showing that it moves these populations, that, people get better grades, they adhere more. I mean, all those kinds of things, the real behavioral things, not just, I feel better. No, real behavioral things. Now, over time, what will happen? I don't know. I mean, I kind of suspect that you take something like family therapy or couples therapy. I kind of suspect 10 years from now is scope of practice, one that includes that, maybe. But we'll get there more slowly if somebody lights their hair on fire and sort of sets up, Bob's Couple Therapy Institute because he has a BCBA. Please don't do that. If it ain't on the task list. But there are things on the task list. I mean, we work with modeling. We work with, equivalence-based instruction. We're supposed to know about derived relational responding. No, it doesn't yet say relational frames. Okay, fine. We work with parent training. We are supposed to use these different principles. Take something like modeling. We know that if you yourself, in your work with someone, are modeling psychological flexibility, they are more likely to become more psychologically flexible. You can see it in the parent work. You can see it in the group work. What? Okay, so you're going to be prohibited because of scope of practice to work on your own emotional openness versus closedness? Nobody can prohibit that. And it'll be in your conversations when you're, let's say, a client or a parent raises some really difficult emotional stuff and you walk into that instead of running away. When they can see that it's hard for you, you're modeling. So I would take the task list, and we're doing an article right now where we're walking this out point by point. I say we, a kind of whole group, Jonathan Tarbach's kind of taken the lead of pretty well-known behavior analysts, and then they stuck me on. But where we're going to lay this out, but at boot camp, if you come, we're going to be in Baltimore, as was mentioned. I don't remember the exact dates, but
it's the 27th through the 30th
of
September.
Oh, cool. Okay. Now I'm oriented. I'm busy. I'm running around. It's so much fun because people can ask every question. They work in small groups. They actually try these things out. They see it done. They can say, show it to me. And you do it. Can I try that? You can try it. You can get feedback. I mean, it's behavioral skills training, right? And so the BST kind of format is right inside it. And at every step along the way, if it's like, this just seems mentalistic, this is not behavioral, I always say to my behavior analytic audiences, and they've been coming to ACT trainings for 10 years and very high density now. There's even a few ACT trainings like ACT 2 where it really fits pretty well. And some of it's just flat out therapy training. But boot camp for behavior analysts is just by and for behavior analysts. So it's the place to start if you can get there. But I say at any point, if you think that I'm saying something that's not behavioral and it's actually now becoming interfering, demand of me that I give an adequate to your satisfaction behavioral account. And if you're not closed-minded, I've not yet failed that test. And I don't think it's by bullying people. I think it's because we spent 30 plus years on this, and we didn't come out fast. I mean, the first ACT book is 99. The first ACT workshop is 1982. How many people do that? And in that gap, relational frame theory was created. Functional contextualism worked out. All those kind of cool things that Linda and I worked on. The measures were put in so that we're ready. Now, I'm not saying we know all the answers. There are places where we're not ready. But fortunately, it's a big community. And when people get interested, some folks actually want to develop it. They want to tweak it. They want to add things. And so it's a living thing. But that's what will happen at boot camp. You'll have a personal experience. You'll see the principles. And you'll see the technology. And you'll get practice. And by the time you leave, here's the metaphor of boot camp. You bring in new recruits. By the time they leave, they can be a soldier. And now they're not necessarily skilled. A new recruit is going to be got a new recruit in our group here today. The Corps just added Sally. But she can hold a gun or whatever the thing is. It's like that. And if we fail that test in boot camp, if you come out and you don't know what to do and you have no ideas how to start, then we failed, and you should tell your colleagues to stay away. If we've delivered, do the opposite, and that's why these things are selling out. People are really quickly seeing the value, personally, professionally, and with their clients. And the bottom line, behavior change in your clients. Behavior change in your clinic and your colleagues. The bottom line, behavior change. It's the same old socially important behavior change. Beowulf and Risley. Hold it to that.
Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. What sort of ongoing supervision do these soldiers need after attending the boot camp? Because I think supervision is something I see come up frequently when people talk about their concerns with us everyday BCBAs, attending a workshop or something, learning enough to be dangerous, and then running amok.
I agree, but that's true with every single behavioral technology. There are people who are BCBAs who don't know how to do IO work. Now, if you're going to get out there and work with organizations, should you be talking to people who are behavior analysts who work with organizations? Do you think so? I'd say yes, right? So think of supervision in a couple of ways. One is, can you put together the structure that ensures that you're safe while you're learning, and that enough value is added even when you're learning, that you're actually helping by your learning, you're not inhibiting by your learning. If you have technologies and principles that are clear enough and broadly applicable enough and can be fitted into what you're already doing, what you already know enough, you can pretty quickly get to the point where that's true. We've done studies where 8 hours of training in acceptance and commitment therapy with clinical students lead to better outcomes than more extensive training in traditional CBT. And are they skilled ACT therapists? The heck no. They've had 8 hours of training. You'll have a lot more of that at boot camp on the behavior analytics side. Now, what? So clarity of principles, clarity of methods, availability of resources. Supervision, you can think of kind of passively. You tell me what to do. Think of more actively. How can I set it up so that when I'm learning, I'm still doing well? Well, you can read the books. You can access the tapes. You can create a peer supervision group. Turns out people who are learn at different rates in different areas on different things because they have different backgrounds. If you get 10 people together to study ACT and RFT, none of whom are being actively supervised by an expert, they will all know things if they're just spend some time and bring their full behavioral repertoire to it. Each one will know some things that the other person doesn't know. Get them together in a peer supervision group. We have organized ways to do that. you can do a phone-based consultation, video-based consultation. Plus, ACBS is essentially another face of behavior analysis. Very cheap to join, $12 minimum. We have values-based dues, pay what you think it's worth. There's special interest groups. There's people you can email any question out and get a good answer. So yes, and in addition to that, if you can get a BCBA who is actually very skilled, and there are some recognized ACT trainers who are BCBAs, and you can work it into their schedule and so forth, that's even better. But let's not let the good be the perfect be the enemy of the good. We can get ourselves close enough with our behavior analytic training, done responsibly with help from others who are not necessarily the world's expert, but they're on the same path, to make this thing safe. Now, by the time it fully enters into the task list, we'll have this all laid out, and it'll be a little more hierarchical than probably even I like, because I've always liked the sense of personal responsibility. It's good to know that you don't know. If what you do with that energy is you learn more. And good behavior analysts have always done that. And nobody had to wag a finger at them. Nobody had to shame them. And nobody had to threaten them with the withdrawal of a BCBA if they made a mistake. They did it because they cared about the people they were serving. And they wanted to be good. Bring that energy to it, and you yourself will sense the edges where I just don't know enough. There's people around who can help you. And for very low cost or no cost.
So we've identified, this is one more question on the scope of practice, and we'll move on.
Sure.
But we've identified basically 2 points on that slope, right? We've got Bob's Therapy Shack, where, right. he's way off course, doing things he ought not to be doing. And then and so that's the bottom of the slope, I guess. And at the top of the slope is obviously perhaps not using ACT, or or at the starting point of the timeline in terms of your training and things like that. And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, can you give me some ideas of some gray areas? Let's say as you travel, because you mentioned the slippery slope earlier. So as you travel down, what are some warning signs? I am veering out of my scope of practice. I need to find a supervisor, or I need to call a colleague who's has experience in this, that might be a little bit more subtle than, say, Bob's marriage counseling.
A few warning signs. If you find yourself being interested in treating syndromes, just stop, dead stop. We're changing behavior. We're not treating syndromes. Syndromes have a latent disease model. You can't wash that thing out. It's like skunk on clothes. It's better to burn them than to wash them.
So meaning depression, anxiety, OCD.
You think you're treating depression? Stop, dead stop. I mean, even the clinicians shouldn't be doing that. The clinically trained folks to do that. Because the latent disease model is one of the most toxic ideas ever visited upon the human population. It produces suffering and misery everywhere we go. It slows down scientific progress. It's everything bad that the behavior therapists knew and somehow forgot when they were bought off by big pharma and by the hegemony of the DSM.
Can you give us a quick rundown of the latent disease model for those of us not, who don't have as much of a clinical background?
Well, the syndromes superficially look like, hey, it's just a collection of things I see and things people report, signs and symptoms. No, it's not. It's not. Because it's a strategy to get to etiology, the cause, course and mechanism, how it plays out over time, and response to treatment. When you have those 3 things, you have a disease. Diseases aren't just caught on toilet seats. You can have diseases of all different kinds. And in academic medicine, which is where the syndromal thinking came from, in academic psychiatry, sometimes it paid off. Sometimes it didn't. Like an example, cancer. Cancer did a syndrome botanizing the 5 out of 9s and the 4 out of 7s. It's always 50% plus 1, so at least some overlap. Even if there's 250,000 different varieties of PTSD, there's at least some overlap among those 250,000 varieties, et cetera. But the hope is that when you do that, that you're going to identify the functional cause. In cancer, you botanize from morning to night for years and years and years on end. Eventually they say, we're not getting any better. When does that fail? When a few processes give rise to many different topographical manifestations, or when many different processes can give rise to similar topographical manifestations. So form over function is the syndromal game at its worst. So like in cancer, what they did is went in the basic labs, starts studying oncogenes, stuff like that. Now they're back with you're going to be more likely to survive. This is pretty important. You got cancer, all kinds of cancers, you're more likely to survive now. Behavior analysis has always had that kind of, high precision, high scope principle thing. And so we don't need the education to like high scope, high precision principles are the game we're playing. But the latent disease model that's in there is underneath the superficial appearance is this thing behind it that's making it happen. And we'll discover that because that's the really functional entity. We know this is topography by really focusing on the topography. Well, you can say that for a decade or 2 or 3, but not 4 or 5 or 6. Not after you spent billions of dollars. And there's not one single example of a psychiatric disease since untreated syphilis. You don't see general paresis in your practice. So it was a failed. And so even NIMH doesn't want to fund it anymore, which means academic psychiatry doesn't want to do it anymore. What are they going to? Process. Well, that's our game. We want to play process. Now they're thinking brain process. They don't quite say it that way, but that's really what they mean, or genetics. But no, we'll do a lot better with process in the sense of the act-in context, history and circumstance. And that's not all of it. We need genetics, epigenetics, we need all that. But we'll make rapid progress there. So the one warning sign is starting to thinking that people have something, because what do they have? Well, that's the disease. That's the toxic thing. You get that into the public discourse, what happens? 60% of the people who are suffering with some kind of mental health problem get medications only, even though the side effects and long-term effects make that completely insane. We're now in the United States settling down to under 10% get psychosocial only. So as soon as they swallow that syndrome pill, and you can see it in the effect, they feel relief because it's not my fault, and they start pulling the reins in on their own life. What can you expect of me? I have a disorder. They start not looking to psychosocial. They stop not looking to behavior. They stop not caring about growth. They're looking for the pill. And they're taking it, and then they're surprised that actually it's not paying off. And so you take another pill, and then a pill to regulate the side effects of the first pills. Medications can be helpful. I'm not arguing against that. Even done studies to get them to be used sometimes. But shorter term, reasonable dosage. They were never tested to be used for a life. They were there more like 6 weeks, 3 months. Mix it with psychosocial. So a lot of bad things happen. And frankly, a multi-trillion-dollar industry has more marketing than your dreams of penetrating the culture can ever live up to. They don't care what the outcomes are. As long as they can say you have something, they can sell the pills. And so, kids, once you have ADHD, boom. The fact that 3 years later the effect size is approaching 0 and behavioral methods, initially they actually look like they're not quite as good, but then they catch up depending on the trial and big randomized trials. But they don't have those side effects. Oh, whoops, the kids are 1 to 2 inches shorter at full growth. God knows what's going on in their brains by, eating speed for their whole childhood. So we need a different cultural conversation. Now, that's a rant on syndromes, but that's one sign. I'd say, another sign might be if you no longer are focused on behavior, but you're now focused on simply oral complaints from people, period, end of story. We want that. We're not criticizing verbal behavior. That's real behavior. Social validation. We invented that. Don't walk away from that. The opinions of other people are part of our measures. But that's another warning sign. I'm simply taking my distress measure. I suppose another one might be that you can no longer integrate it with with the populations you've been working with, or especially with the behavioral principles. You can't give a clear behavioral rationale point by point for what you're doing. If you were doing regular behavioral analytic practice that way, you'd know you're outside, because scope of practice and competence to practice are kind of two allied things. And so that means a deeper dive. That means you're going to know I'm sorry, if you go to boot camp, we're going to do some work on RFT. You got to know RFT. Not to the nines necessarily, but enough that you're not saying things like stimulus equivalence is just generalization. I mean, completely ridiculous things that so distort our principles that they no longer even work, so those are three big warning signs. You don't have a tight behavioral account. You're slipping into syndromes. The other one I forgot. It's my 70th birthday. I get to forget.
That's right. That's I tripped you up a little bit with the asking you to indulge us in a little bit of a digression there. So,
oh no, not at all.
So, if you were to make, let's say you had some moderate level of, omnipotence, let's say you had a magic wand that was, can't cure cancer, can't make world peace, but you could affect changes in the way BCBAs are trained from the standpoint of coursework, practicum experiences, supervision, etc. What would be some things that you, Steve Hayes, would say, I want to do this, that, and the other thing?
Two things I would really want in there. I would want some serious work on philosophy of science, and not just from Skinner, but from things that have expanded out. I hope some of the things I've done in functional contextualism, or at least things like, the 1986 piece with Aaron Brownstein, one of the best behavior analysts who ever lived, a major figure in the matching law and so forth. And we ran our labs together all those years ago of mentalism, behavior relations, and a behavior analytic view of the purpose of science, published in TBA in 1986. In other words, that you really think clearly about your philosophical assumptions and how they penetrate into how you think about things, what you even think knowledge is, how science works, how it progresses. Now that's still kind of in there, but I think it's been weakened too much. When I go to ABAI, I sometimes see people thumping on radical behaviorism, wagging fingers and things. But that's not what I mean. I mean an active exploration of your own assumptions, and that's what philosophy of science is for. That's one. Number two, I'm going to give you only three. There are relational operants. Time's up. There are relational operants. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's a fact, and it is as much a fact as anything in human behavior analytic work, in my opinion. There's more studies with more consistent evidence on that. So let's work it out. I'm not saying it's finished theory, but take relational operants and their capacity through transformation of stimulus functions to harness evolutionarily more ancient learning processes. Third, we all should be reading seriously in evolution science, in modern evolution science, but including some of the classics. If I had to just give you one book to read, it would be Jablonka and Lamb, Evolution in Four Dimensions. But then I would take it very seriously. If I had you two books to read, the next one would be the one I just put out with David Sloan Wilson. And I'm sorry for the self-reference, but if we combine those two things, why would that matter? Well, this was Fred's agenda. Radical behaviorism, all the way up with learning principles, even to include cognition, nested under evolution science. So that's Skinner's agenda, those three things. And one of the things that only we can do, because we're kind of the applied wing of evolution science in a way that, let's say, purely genetic folks can never be, other than to warn people who they marry or predict what's going to happen going forward. We're the real prediction and influence wing. And not just that, the people who are trying to do socially based evolution science, kind of cultural change, and so forth. We have the capacity, I believe, through our behavior to do what actually happened to some degree with behavior analysis. Most people will know to seek out a behavior analyst if you have an autistic spectrum disordered kid, if they get up and they do some reasonable research on the internet. Just normal people. They'll find us. Not always. Sometimes they'll be swimming with dolphins. There's things out there. But, often they'll find us if they're careful about it. Until evolution gets viewed by the society that way, we are not able to enter the society in the way that our principles should take us fully there. In clinical, you can do it. In social change and transformation, in bigotry and prejudice, cooperation between people, etc., we can't yet do it. We can't fully do it. We can't go from rats to Walden 2. Why? Because I think in part because evolution science needs to be put through a process that we went through, which is to show to normal people, don't be so scared of us. Clockwork Orange, blah, blah, blah. Instead of Freedom and Dignity was written by Skinner. No, he never wrote that book. When they see that we can be useful to them with what they want. I've got a child. I've just learned he's diagnosed with autism. What can I do? Those parents, when they see what happens and what we're increasingly able to happen by bringing in some of the relational operant kind of work, we can go way beyond mental age 3. We can go up to high functioning on the spectrum kind of folks, the kind of stuff that is going on in Southern Illinois, et cetera. They will come running to us. So I think those 3 things, because those are the 3 things that have been the philosophy and kind of focus on principle stuff we've got, but having an adequate analysis of cognition, being able to scale it into the evolutionary thing, allows us both to do a better job within our work, but also to change the cultural conversation. I'm writing a book right now, and I'm struggling. It's a trade book. It's a popular book on ACT. And the publisher doesn't know it yet. Maybe they'll know it, but I'll probably fail at this because publishers have the right to title books anything they want. But I'm trying to get the word evolve in there. And it's for a strategic reason. It needs to be in the cultural conversation, and we have to help make evolution safe for the world, because it's part of why we couldn't do Walden 2. It's a reason why those New York Times sentences were written. The mind control people have shown up. So those are the 3 things I do. And now one thing you'll find is start reading some serious contemporary evolution science. You're going to go like, whoa, there's a lot of things I need to know. And some of that stuff, Skinner's first paper, a third, and there was on tropism and ants. Some of that is, stuff that would help us just having nice conversation with our biological colleagues and understanding more about the limits on learning. Learning isn't everything. There's multiple dimensions of evolution and multiple streams at multiple levels. But we then can be part of the scientific conversation and the cultural conversation in a way that we're just not now. Now, when that happens, your question about supervision goes away because you're being trained in the training programs. And that's going to mean some changes in the books that you read and the things that are required. ABAI, I think, is well aware of this. And I would be really surprised if we go out, let's say 10 years from now, if it A, isn't on the task list, B, if it isn't overtly sanctioned by, promoted by ABAI, all the things I mentioned, and C, if it's not a requirement inside the accredited training programs around the world that lead to people being able to get a BCBA. That'd be cool. I think it's going to happen.
You touched on ABAI as well as ACBS. ACBS. Let me get that straight. The Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, for those who are unfamiliar with the acronym. Given the fast growth of ACBS, what are the lessons that ABAI and perhaps other professional organizations can learn?
Yeah. Well, we built ACBS around the psychological flexibility model. It was built late enough in the process that I was more clear about it. And, I wasn't trying to hurt ABAI, but I really started getting worried. I told the story when we were off camera beginning, my last time going there about 8-9 years ago. Jack Michael, who I adore, I love and respect, came over and said, "Steve, I hate your psychology." And it wasn't just Jack, it was the whole era of those folks. So I thought, oh man, I'm actually hurting instead of helping just by being here. And so it wasn't hostility or anything. It's just behavior analysis is too important to let the word behavior analysis become a barrier to where it needs to go. And so, Skinner's skepticism in the last part of his life about would we actually be there for the kinds of things that are in the beginning of Beyond Freedom and Dignity, the reason why you have to evolve cultures deliberately, the things that we can do with wars and polluting the planet and all the rest, stigma, prejudice, etc., required that we move ahead. So when but when we started ACBS, we did some cool things like we don't certify therapists because it creates hierarchy. We have cultural traditions that ensure a greater degree of acceptance and diffusion, really. Getting into a conversation where different ways of talking about things are possible. That whole issue of middle-level terms that you probably talked about, of being able to use language more fluidly as long as it's tethered and constantly re-examined and updated as we go, taking the perspective of the other person, extending acceptance into compassion, focusing on values. What do you really want to be about in your life? Empowering other people to do that. When you build an organization around that, if anyone were to come to an ACBS who's a behavior analyst, and I've been going to ABAs for a long time, if you're old, you'll feel the energy and you'll remember, and you'll probably actually say a sentence like, "This reminds me of the old days." And it is like that. But also they'll probably say something like, there's something very open about this community. Because no one's ever going to say, like, "Oh, don't say stabbing operations." They might not know what it is. A lot of them do over time. They learn more and more. But there's a genuine conversation going on. I mentioned earlier that interpretation went too far. If I can tell a moment of the place where I broke with Skinner, can I tell that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
I was somebody will know where it is because I can describe the room. It would hold about 200, 300 people. Fred was up at the front, and there was a huge stained glass window behind him. I don't know what that hotel is. It's got to be in the early days, maybe Maba, maybe Abba. And Fred said, "I'm not sure verbal behavior will ever be turned into a scientific research program. It's an interpretation." There's a Jewish tradition, where you get to a point where, your children are no longer your children. It doesn't quite apply, but you rend your shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I was always tempted to go up in my room and rend my shirt. Because I don't want an analysis of language and cognition that's not an experimental program. It's called the experimental analysis of behavior. It's not called the interpretive analysis of behavior. And what Fred said was interpretation was needed sometimes because you can't manipulate everything. So I get you can't, if you're doing cosmology, you can't move planets around yet. Maybe eventually we can. I hope we don't. But maybe someday we can crash planets together. But you can model in the physics lab exactly point to point with high precision. That's not what's going on here. Some of this interpretive stuff got too loose, too far out there. And when my own research suddenly popped the illusion of the book Verbal Behavior, and I realized, wait a minute, that footnote that says it does not escape my attention that the interaction between an experimenter and his laboratory animal comprises a small but genuine verbal community. Now I've got the double reason to rend my shirt, because now you're telling me the way I'm going to understand human complexity, human cognition, is only in work with laboratory animals that don't talk, that don't reason, that don't get metaphors, that don't have jokes, that don't have irony, that can't tell stories, that can no. My answer is that's no. Something else is going on between you and I. Don't tell me it's just complexity. Or at least model it. If you really believe it, model it. And put a time clock there. You only get a decade or two. You don't get centuries, because nobody will care about you centuries from now. And the time clock has run out. And people realize it. I'm sorry for the rant, but this was an early thing. And I said, okay, I'm not becoming an anti-Skinnerian. I never became an anti-Skinnerian. I'm a neo-Skinnerian, but I went in a different direction. And I sat down with Aaron Brownstein and I said, here's the deal. I know rules are toxic. I can see it in the lab. We've been researching it. What the heck are we going to do? A precise account act was already kind of just starting out of some things that I'd seen in my own personal life. And Aaron said, here's this article, 1972 by Murray Sidman. A week later, one reason why sometimes I'm busted for not talking about Murray enough, he's a superhero. But the problem is that it only lasted a week before I was interpreting it as a relational operant. And very quickly, he didn't want to do that. So that put us on different paths, but not because, he gave us the keys to the kingdom in terms of meaning. And once you combine that with relational operants, now you can go anywhere. You can take anything that the cognitivists, the social psychologists, the rest, anything, implicit cognition, anything. To my mind, give me a topic we can't do. We can do it and even do it better. Our measures of implicit cognition are better than theirs. Why? Because they're built on association. And we've got relation. That's a different unit. So it put me on a journey that 35 years put me here. And, if it all works out, we're going to put Skinnerian thinking revisited with a new face. That's what ACBS is. But it's happening inside ABAI. There are going to be two wings, I think, over time. We're going to put it at the center of the behavioral science universe. That's going to happen. I don't think I'll live to see it, but it's going to happen. You can feel it happening, and that'll be really cool. But I did have to break. And, the reason I say a post-Skinnerian account, it's in the RFT book, is because it wasn't anti-Skinnerian. We're saying, okay, in addition to that, there's also this. And it's really important, and it really changes a lot of things. Well, do we really want to have science where you can't do that? I don't know of science that can't do that. You can go to conventions where the Freudians will talk only about what Freud wrote, or the Adlerians. Do you want to go to one of those conventions? I don't. I not have disrespect for Freud, but give me the living, breathing, and frankly, they're doing good stuff, mentalization and that kind of stuff. Fonagy, I don't know if you're following what the Freudians are doing. Relational stuff actually has some resemblance to ACT. So it's not, I'm not saying out of arrogance that other people don't know we do. No, they know a piece, but the ones who want to turn science into living memorials, do it somewhere else. Could it be a university pep rally or something? Pick something else. Don't pick this. And I think I hope I'm not sounding too critical, but I did have that moment, and it was as an assistant professor, so it allowed me to spend an entire academic year trying to carry forward what I thought was most important about Skinnerian thinking, which was its functional and contextual piece, and to get over the mountain that he recognized in 1938. I see this applies everywhere, but it might not apply to language and cognition. 1957. Oh, yes, it does too. Nope. You did it by changing what a functional definition was. You can't even give me the definition of a verbal stimulus in terms of the history of the individual. Well, that's not a functional definition. You can't put it off on somebody else's history, the history of the audience. No, you suddenly changed the unit. You've done exactly what you said theory should never do. Stay at the level of analysis. So our heroes make mistakes sometime. And I'm sure I've made a pile of them, and I hope I've created a culture where people are ready to beat me like a baby seal if I'm still alive when I make them, and I'm sure I've made them. But not out of disrespect, but out of the deeper respect for the journey that we're on of bringing science into human lives everywhere that it needs to go to make a difference.
Well, Steve, I'm glad we stayed away from some controversial topics.
Yeah, I know some people hate me now. I love you though. I love you, Jack.
We'll definitely get some fan mail.
He's still alive and well. So.
No, I'm just kidding. That was. So I think it's probably time to close at least this round. And maybe I can twist your arm to, come back for another round. Maybe taking some audience questions, perhaps. But
that'd be awesome. It would take no twist.
All right, very good.
Because
very good.
I love the conversation and even the controversy. Bring your skepticism, just the cynicism. Disconnected from evidence that we don't need, but that. Yep. And I don't want to shame you, but let's just get back from
all right.
excessive interpretation.
I'll hold you to that. All right. Audience members, if you have questions for Steve, down the road, I will. I'll probably send an email out to the email list and kind of put out a call for questions on social media as well. So that would be fun. So let's close the show with this. And I always close every show with this by asking, what advice would you give to a newly minted BCBA? Someone just passed the test. They went taking all their coursework, gotten their supervision. They're either out looking for a job or just taking their first job. What advice would you have for someone in that point of their career?
Well, the most important source of transformational change is your own behavior. And the most important source of that are the consequences of your behavior, the single most important. I mean, other things are involved. And the most important consequences, the one that are most proximal, are what you can bring to the behavior itself based on this evolutionary recent adaptation of language and cognition. Another way to say it is, what do you care about? What are your values? What do you want to be about? What are the qualities of your behavior that you want to see reflected professionally and in your life? Here's another way to say it. What does your heart say? And let the heart lead, and then put the head and the hands behind it. Yeah, you need the intellect, and you need the technical skill. But intellect and technical skill cut off from that, empties out. And you start thinking that really what you came to do is building the biggest possible practice that you can with the most employees that make the most money. And you'll rationalize it, but you'll stop reading journals. You'll stop being interested. You'll stop trying new things. You'll trying to figure out how to wall off your success and chase off competitors. And that's not what you came here to do. You're going to make enough money. Remember why you got in this field. Remember what you care about. And if you want to weigh in on that, I'll give you 4 quick ways in, but they're really fast. Think of a really sweet moment in your education or in your work life, and you'll find in there something you deeply really want. It could be seeing a client change. Okay, build your work around that, and then learn all the new things to move it. It could be places where you felt especially pained, like, I don't have an answer. I don't know what to do. I can't change it. That parent dropped out. That parent took that kid to another place. I know what they took him to is nonsense. Why did they do that? Take the pain that's inside that, flip it over, and you'll see what you really have passion for and caring for. And build your skills in such a way that you can engage people in such a way and really deliver the goods in such a way. Don't rationalize it. That you can be there for them in terms of what they need. And the third way, pick a hero. Pick a guide. And it doesn't have to be a science hero. It could be your grandmother. It could be your spouse. It could be a therapist. It could be your sib. It could be a coach. But somebody that is relevant to the work that you do. Just pick a hero or a heroine. That doesn't say that much. I'm not gender specific. Now unpack in your mind, what does that person stand for? You're going to find values there. You're going to find stuff that you want to be like. And then here's the fourth way. If you were writing a story of your life, and this whole training was part of the story, and now you get to write the next chapter, how would you write it that would really fit kind of who you are and what you want to be? Not success, not applause. When you're dead and buried, nobody's going to be remembering that stuff. I'm talking about what gets you up in the morning with excitement, what takes you into the clinic with eyes open, even if you're tired, or gets you to work on your skills, you're learning new things. And literally actually kind of write out that little chapter. What I really want to be about. And, I wanted, can I tell you, I know we've gone long. Can I do a 1-minute story?
Yeah, go right ahead. Go right ahead, yeah.
The late Willard Day, editor of the journal Behaviorism, a functional contextual behavior analyst, one of Skinner's good friends, really. I mean, allies at least. Came to West Virginia University when I was a graduate student. And he said, we need to understand language as it's actually used. And he's raising his hands. He's a very charismatic kind of guy. And he's talking about Skinner and basically being able to take Skinnerian thinking all the way out into the complexity of human thought, taking the door that was opened by radical behaviorism, as Skinner said, to e.g. boring. I'm not interested just in boring. I'm interested in boring from within. It's private events. When you start thinking about the scientists behaviorally, that was what was radical. Now it's opened up. We can do that. But then he gave no reason for people to walk through that door because overt behavior will give us everything that we know, that we need to know there. No, it won't. No, it won't. It's a new process. So I'm sitting there in the audience, and I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And it's really trying to make Skinner's vision real in a way that fit that challenge. And if you have something like that you have heart for, those early articles where, your professors sneer, or those answers to the interview questions, I want to help people, where they kind of giggle. Now that you got your BCBA, go back to those moments and see if they don't give you some good guidance about the kind of human being you want to be and the kind of professional you want to be. You chase that, you can change the world.
Great. Well, Steve, again, thank you for spending part of your birthday with us at the Behavioral Observations podcast. This has been a really fun conversation. I've enjoyed it quite a bit.
No better place to be, Matt. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to my colleagues. Let me know how I can support your work.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.